For this demo today, we're going to be working on creating an embroidery image. And so to do that, some of the things you'll need are the things that are in front of us. So it'll be helpful to have a pencil or a pen or a Sharpie, whatever you're going to be using to draw that onto your embroidery fabric, which is this one here. Again, it could be different colors. There's blue, gray, black, this like off-white, and like a burlap-y color. So these are what you'll be using. Uh, a needle. Right now, this is how the needles look. They're all together. You only need one for our project. The hoop here comes in different sizes, so just make sure your fabric will fit inside this hoop. That's our overall goal. And this is embroidery floss. So this is the material we'll actually be using to embroider into our fabric. Just a couple reminders. So the different embroidery colors here is what you'll be using to embroider with, but the floss itself is pretty thick. So what you will be doing once you have your, when you will be going to embroider, is you'll be splitting this in half, because you don't need all of this. This is pretty thick to go through your material. And so what you'll need to do is split that in half. It's strands of 4. So you'll be splitting it into 2 groups of 2. It makes it a little bit easier to thread through the eye of the needle, as well as it'll resist a little bit better when pulling through the embroidery fabric. So just keep that in mind when you're working with these. So the amount of floss you have is actually double, since you will be using it twice. You'll be splitting it in half and using it twice. All right. So for our next part here, what we want to do is we're going to draw our design onto our embroidery fabric. What made it a little bit easier is I put the hoop around here, so you have an idea of where you want your design to be. You can draw a line there, just so you sort of figure out where it's going to be sort of sitting on the material. So most of the designs do not need to fill the entire design, but you also want to make sure they're not super tiny. So make a pretty good adjustment according to how big your hoop is. If you have like a 10-inch hoop and your hoop is a lot larger, your design does not have to fill that entire piece. It can, but just make sure you have enough sort of gauge on how much material you have to fill that. I wouldn't make your design really tiny, but you could still make it sort of in the middle, probably about like this size, like 5 or 6 inches. So it's still like the center part of your overall design. So be working on those. You want to draw it onto this material first. If you have a smaller hoop, this is right here is, for example, is an 8-inch hoop. If you have one that's smaller, your design might need to go all the way to the edge, just so you have an overall realistic size, or a size large enough so your design is clear and understandable. So for our project here, I'm going to draw my design onto my embroidery fabric. Keeping in mind, you're going to be using a pencil. Again, you can use this one or a traditional pencil. Just try to press down enough so that your design shows up. This is just a guide for you. You don't have to shade it in. You don't have to do anything like that. Maybe just break down the sides, the pieces, saying like, so I know that some of the colors I'll be using are like yellow, black, red, white. And so it just helps me identify when I go to embroider them what parts are in those areas. Maybe I'll put an initial in those, so like Y for yellow, W for white, B for black, just so I know when I'm going through that my design will match my picture that I chose. Next thing you want to do is then grab your material like this, and you want to place it inside of your hoop. So the first thing you want to do is you want to loosen the embroidery hoop so that the two pieces can be separated. So if yours is plastic or wood, you can separate these so you can see that they open up. So what you want to do is take the inside one, place your design over top of that. Try to make sure your design is like sort of in the center, so that when it goes through, that there's a little bit of a buffer all the way around your design. So I'm seeing here that like the part of the hoop, if you pinch it down, I want to make sure there's a little bit of enough of a gap between the edge of my drawing and my material. So I think that's pretty good. I can see that the edge of the wood here still has a little bit of space. I can maybe move it over a little bit more. That looks good. What I want to do is make sure your top hoop is open over top of it. You're going to slide that down right on top of your embroidery design. So next thing I'm going to do is you're going to try to tighten this up just a little bit, just so you can give it a little bit of time. Now you're going to sort of pull from the edges and just help to tighten out your overall design. You want to make sure your embroidery material is really taut, like so it's stiff in the middle. And so by doing this, you keep pulling, and then once you have a good idea, you tighten a little bit more. Keep doing the same thing. By having this taut embroidery fabric in the middle, it'll make it a little bit stiffer, so that the floss, when it goes through, won't be pulling it and moving your design around. So you got to keep doing this, and it helps to make your design stand out a little bit clearer because you're making sure this is tight material. You might need to keep pinching down the sides as you are tightening it, so the two either wood or plastic pieces are flush or even to each other. All right. So you should be able to hear the tight parts just sound like a drum. So by doing that, you can see that there's a little bit of give, but you try to get as best as possible. That's pretty good. So there's not a lot of give on the material, but it's tight enough that like it's almost flat, like a piece of paper would be. And again, you could hear it. Okay. So at this point, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to be threading the needle. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to grab some of your embroidery floss. So for this purpose, I had a knot in part of my design, and so I cut that out. So I have just now a smaller section of the embroidery floss. You don't need to have all of the floss when you're trying to embroider. It'd be really complicated. So just try to have like maybe an arm's length. This is a little over maybe 1.5 feet. This is pretty good because then you're going to use that to incorporate it into your design. So it doesn't have to be the entire embroidery floss piece, but maybe 1 foot or 1.5 feet, so that you can just do them section by section and then rethread the needle. So the first thing you want to do is you're going to split your floss. So if you're looking at this, the floss is 6 individual pieces. So you can see that there's 3 on this one. Hopefully you guys can see it. And also 3 on this one. So what you're going to do is you're going to split that all the way down. If you want, you could put it in the same hand and just try to keep this sporadically unraveled, so that it doesn't keep twisting up and stops it from getting a knot. So just keep counter twisting so that you don't get any knots. in your floss. Go. So we have one that's going to be our sort of our second strand, and the one you're going to use is here. So what you're going to do, if you have any like stray pieces at the end, I would suggest using your pair of scissors and just cutting those off so you have a clean sort of edge to your design. What you can try to do is try to like twist them together. You can also like lick your fingers or lick the edge of the material to sort of bind them together. What you're going to try to do next, you're going to grab your needle, but what you're going to do is try to stretch this out. There we go. Make sure that no more wrinkles in it. And then we're going to try to thread this needle through the eye of the needle right there. So that little slight opening. So again, helps to like lick it and then like sort of press it flat with your finger so it has a flat opening through that design. Might take a couple attempts. That's totally fine. When you do it, just make sure you get all of the pieces in through the material. You don't want like all but one to go through. So you can see here, they're all on there, like so. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to pull this all the way through. So we're going to get the needle to be about halfway in the middle of our embroidery floss. So here's our needle, and if we hold it along the way, we're going to see we have the two edges of our embroidery sort of about the same length. So what we're going to do is, to prevent this from being pulled through the material, you're going to tie a knot here. So just a simple knot. Again, make sure both pieces are going through. Try to get the knot like farthest down the floss as possible. So that your material, you're using the most of your material as you can. So just a simple knot here. Make sure I still have all the pieces there. So you can sort of see that little knot. That's to prevent the embroidery floss from like when we go through the material, just like continually not stopping. So that's gonna be like your little stopper there for your material, so it doesn't go all the way through. You have a little frayed pieces at the end here. Again, just use your scissors. You can just cut those off, make it a little bit neater. So now we have our embroidery material ready to go, or our embroidery floss. We have our picture, and we are going to start. So the first thing you want to do is make sure your embroidery design, you are starting from underneath. So you're going to be starting from underneath your design like this. So you can see the embroidery needle coming through from underneath. This is to stop to make sure your knot that we just made is not visible. So it's going to be underneath our design. So back here is where all the different knots and the ends of all of our pieces will be. Okay. So for me, this is yellow. I know his skin's yellow here, so that's what we're going to go with first. So I'm using the guide on my drawing here as a sort of like trying to figure out where I want to start. Here we go. So we're going to pull it up. I'm going to go across. So for our purposes here, we're going to try to go back and forth. So we're going to start going back and forth. And so to do that, I want to find the material that's right next to it, like an open spot right next to it. So I could start to fill in that area. So I'm going to keep going back and forth. Again, it's going to require a lot of like little pokes just to make sure you're getting the right area to start off with. So if I start up in here on the side of his hand and I'm landing or ending down here where like the cuff of his shirt is, that I know that my next one going up will have to be against the cuff, so that I'm trying to use as much material as possible, or as least amount of material as possible, but covering the most amount of area. You're doing this, try to make sure your floss isn't overlapping with other uh, the piece that you're using currently, so you're not trying to create any knots or mess up any specific areas while you're going through your design. So I can tell I'm starting to run out of material, so I'm going to be very mindful of the next couple pieces I place in to my fabric. So I make sure I leave enough available floss. I want to make sure I leave enough available floss so that I can tie off my stitch. So I have probably about enough now. So I'm gonna pull this through for my current like stopping point. What I'm gonna do is turn this over, and now I'm gonna use this material. I probably have maybe a little bit more, but so you guys can see, what you're gonna do is you're gonna basically just tie a knot, just like so. And then when you're done, you're gonna make sure that knot is finished at the bottom. So you can see I'm starting to make a knot here at the bottom, and so that's to stop my embroidery floss so it doesn't so it'll end at the bottom here. So I'm going to try to get that as close as I can to my piece, like so. So if you're looking at the bottom here, our only in and out pieces of our design are rarely at the edge of our drawing here. And then I just made a knot at the end, and so what I would do is just cut this piece off. Not cutting off the knot, but my extra floss that I don't need for the time being. And now you start to see that we filled in that area. What we're going to do is that we're going to need to come back here with a the different color. Our outline for our project here is going to be black. And I'm going to use this outline to go around the hand so it stands out. And so now that the yellow will have sort of like a refined edge. So we'll go over that, but I'll work on this hand and then come back and we'll do the outline. Okay. So again, this is the bottom. And again, we started with a knot and we end with a knot so that your embroidery floss does not pull all the way through. Okay. The needle with the white, so I could fill in his sleeve here. So we saw before filling in the color first, and then going over with the outline color. It's not as ideal. You can do it that way, but preferably you probably want to do the outline first, just so you know where your design's going to be, and then it's easier to fill it in with the desired color. So for this purpose, we're going to be using white, and we're going to fill in this sleeve here. And again, same steps as before. You're going to start from behind the design and then working your way through the overall piece. And again, we're going to try to tie this off. So we want to make sure there's enough string here so that you can make a loop here and then basically pull the needle right through. So we still have enough. I'll try to get it not as close to the design as possible, like so. Cut this off. You can see it's a little bit easier to follow your design all the way through by doing it this way.